Hello and welcome to the Ghost River Triangle Con Disability Panel. We are so glad that you've joined us. Our hope for this panel is that it'll give us all more insight and perspectives to consider when going forward with our daily lives and to provide some guidance for non-disabled folks on how to make the world a more acceptable and accessible place for disabled folks. We have a lot of specific topics to talk about, and then we are going to take some questions from Twitter that we've gotten. And then if we have time afterwards, I think that we are going to take some questions from the Twitch comments if anybody has any follow-up questions. And to start, we're going to start with defining disability, and then we'll each introduce ourselves. The ADA defines disability or as a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So it's very broad and all-encompassing. So now that that's out of the way, I'm Summer. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is the primary reason that I'm a ambulatory wheelchair user. If you see me at cons, I'll most likely be using my wheelchair or a cane or crutches or some variation of mobility aids. And I'm also autistic, along with, various other mental and physical illnesses that are kind of comorbid with those things. So I'm going to pass it off to Taz and let them do their introduction.
Thanks. So I'm Taz. My pronouns are she and they. I have several disabilities that are kind of in the not properly diagnosed. So officially I have PCOS, which is a hormone disorder. I have chronic pain that affects my muscles and my nerves. I'm autistic, I have PTSD, and I'm currently looking into ADHD. And I'll pass it to Portia.
Hi, I'm Portia. My pronouns are she, her, and I have Asperger's syndrome, which is part of the autistic spectrum. And I will now pass to Quinn.
Hi, my name is Quinn, and my pronouns are they, them. I have autism and comorbid dysthymia or chronic depression. I consider it to be a disability as well because it impacts my daily life in such a way that I get really affected by it. It is important for me to emphasize my disabled identity because it's like a gateway to being understood, and even if they don't understand the whole disability, at least they get a small part, and that's really important to me to be able to communicate to other people.
And I'm Heather. My pronouns are she, her. I am disabled. I have a pretty long, complicated list of physical and mental health problems that cause me to be disabled. The biggest and kind of overarching ones are I have a connective tissue disorder as well. Mine is called Marfan syndrome. Very comorbid to that. I have something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I also have severe anxiety and depression and ADHD.
So a mixed bag, really.
We have a good kind of representation here of people who are neurodivergent, chronic pain, that kind of stuff. What Quinn was touching on too is talking about how identity and language play a part in being part of the disabled community. One of the things we wanted to touch on was how we prefer to be identified, how we identify ourselves, because a lot of people will sometimes try to talk around the term disabled, and that doesn't really help as far as making disabled people feel better. I'm disabled. I have no problem saying that. I don't know how I'll let everybody else speak for themselves. Summer?
Yeah, over the past several years in particular, I've learned to take pride in the term disabled because of all the activists that I have, become friends with and started learning from, and realizing that, the kind of support that we can give each other is very different from the support that non-disabled people can give us. So that sense of community is really important to me. So considering myself disabled is a big part of that for me.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I prefer the term disabled. I also find there's a lot of freedom in that, because for a long time, I would tell, especially when I was younger, I'd tell doctors or adults in my life, like, there's something wrong, and they'd say, like, no, you're fine. You're just not pushing yourself hard enough, or you're not motivated enough. So being able to be like, no, like, there's actually like limitations to what I can do is actually quite freeing, as opposed to restrictive, the way like most people would think it is. So yeah, I prefer disabled. And I think the important thing too is, like, disabled is not a bad word. Like, it's okay to say it. And it's okay to refer to disabled people as disabled people. Yeah.
I feel like in the UK, there's been quite a shift over the last maybe even 5-6 years and how the word is used. We have a bit of a tiptoe around the subject culture. And I feel like, although I personally wouldn't identify, it's something I'm coming to terms with it. I think because I have a neurological disorder, I find it saying that is better or more is softer than saying disabled, because the culture we still have is, unless it's a physical disability, then this is just something else. But through speaking to ERPers in particular who understand and can agree with me or have shared the experience, it's something I'm getting more comfortable with. So I don't know what will happen in the future, but for now, I think just speaking to people who can understand has really made me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And I think that for some of us that are younger, there's a lot of internalized ableism that we struggle with. We don't want to consider ourselves disabled because we know this is going to be a lifelong thing. But it kind of just, once you accept it and you start, communicating with the community and being part of it and understanding what you can do to make your life and other people's lives better, then it kind of just, it puts it into perspective and it helps you in your own journey.
I also think because as we're all, very together and very willing to be open-minded and discuss these things. And then I found that coming from the top down with like health professionals and the government, it's great that they're starting to change their language. But when I was first diagnosed, I was told, oh, well, why don't you just act? Why don't you just pretend there's nothing wrong? Why don't you just pretend? And I took that really harshly and therefore spent the next few years trying to pretend. And I thought to myself only the other day, actually, well, yes, acting is a hobby, but I am not an actress. I don't want to live my life pretending. I still think back to that psychiatrist saying, oh, why don't you just pretend?
They're asking you to mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's been a common form of treatment or advice for a long time, of like the fake it till you make it thing. But like, if you have a genuine problem, that doesn't make it go away if you're just pretending it's not there. And I think it's also like, you end up pushing yourself further and past your limits, and then you end up sicker, or you end up with other consequences. Even if it's just exhaustion, like that adds up over time, and then you kind of run yourself into the ground, and then you end up kind of blaming yourself for that because you weren't living up to this standard. Whereas like, if you can acknowledge, no, like, I'm disabled, I have limits, then you're not constantly exhausted. And it's never not frustrating, but you're not wearing yourself out either. So you still have resources to do the things you need to do, or to kind of plan, I'm going to put more energy into this today, even though it means I'm not going to get to do that, and kind of find a balance. But you can't really do that when you're constantly just trying to be something you're not.
I think the bottom line when it comes to, so we're talking to people who are non-disabled. I think the bottom line is just take the cue from the disabled, you do know disabled people, I promise. So just listen to how they say it. Because for the most part, just try to avoid any cutesy euphemisms. I don't know a single disabled person who doesn't cringe when they hear differently abled. That I don't have different abilities. I have less abilities. I didn't get ones to replace, ones that I've lost. So yeah, just listen and learn from us. Anybody have anything else on identity and language?
I think it's just a good example of how identity or language provides us with the tools to empower ourselves.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so now we're going to change and talk a little bit about representation in media, whether it's good, bad, the ugly, all of it, where we see ourselves, and you know, what makes us feel connected to the disabled community, and kind of what makes us feel alienated.
Do we want to start with some Winona or the because I know that Portia and I had talked about that we both kind of headcanon Waverly as neurodivergent because of the way she, you know, gets so excited and she's very like she hyper focuses on things and stuff like that. And being able to see ourselves in, you know, stuff like that is really important, even though, you know, and I think it also brings it back to when you're the best representation of neurodivergent characters is not intentional. You know, if you're trying to write an autistic character or something like that, you're probably going to struggle unless you actually are autistic because you don't live with our brains and you don't understand how they work and the specifics of it. And so yeah, Waverly is just, and I know that Heather mentioned Jeremy as well.
Mhm.
I think
Say.
I think I can see although as you say it's not written into the show, the fact that we are able to identify and with these traits, it makes us feel I don't want to say seen and represented, but we can identify and go, oh, I'm like her, and that's really cool. And like it never has to be said. I think that's the best thing is if it doesn't have to be said, but as a viewer you can see yourself and it's not explicit. I think that's really good. It's great if it is explicit too, but specifically, yeah, Waverly and Jeremy. I love the way Jeremy is although it's kind of stereotypical that he's like the science guy, he's also the pop culture guy, and he's the and it's great that he can just wear his funky t-shirts and it not be made a thing of, where I know in other TV shows it's, oh yeah, that guy. And Jeremy and Waverly with all her research and her storyboards, I think everybody, well, neurodivergent people can identify with that straight away and go, oh, it's okay, it's normal to do that, and no one's going to make fun of me because, all right, Winona's made a few quips, but that's sisterly rather than judgmental.
And it's done with love.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
even sorry,
just
go
stuff
Heather.
that comes up. It's never made fun of. I've definitely seen myself as far as like the ADHD aspect and like hyper focus, hyperfixation, that kind of stuff. I see myself doing the silly things like Waverly does, like the murder board, you know, having it all up there and getting completely consumed in that. But like you said, it's never made fun of. It's just she, you know, or when in season 4 when she gets the picture of the rock, she's like, oh, research. Like I relate to that very well.
Yes.
Right.
Or like every time Jeremy does something awkward.
Exactly.
Like, and he's at the point too where he like can recognize that he does something awkward, but he kind of can't stop, like, not to say can't stop himself, but like, you know, it happens and then he's kind of like, oh, like I just made things weird. And it's feel like, especially being autistic, like that's something that's very relatable, but also like that he kind of owns it at this point of like, yeah, I did it again. Like, and then everyone can kind of move on. It's even things like one thing that really got me with Waverly was like when she was laughing when Dolls died, because that's actually like, it's not exclusively an autistic trait, but it's actually a form of empathy that often gets misunderstood as being uncaring because it's basically your passive point of crying. So I really appreciated seeing that as well, because that's definitely for me, like the worse the news is, the more I tend to smile if I have to talk about it. And like, I cannot physically stop myself. And the more I try to stop myself, the worse it gets. So like, I really appreciated that.
And Taz, what was the line again that we all love of Jeremy's?
Oh, it was the oh great, now I have to remember it. It was the nobody, or I don't fit in here, but nobody's asking me to.
Exactly.
Which I think is like a really good summary of like kind of what it's like to be, for the most part, to be like a disabled fan like around Erbers. They tend to be very, and like even Nicole's response of like, you're part of the family is like, I've had Erbers literally like, you know, pull me out of lines at cons and like, you know, put me in front of them or whatever because they can see I'm not doing well. And if I'm like, no, are you sure? Is this okay? They're like, yeah, get up there. Like, your family, we want you here. And so yeah, I feel like that really is a good summary of the fandom in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for me, it's a really comforting line, and kind of a metaphor for Jeremy fitting in with the Erper team or the Erp team, and us fitting in with Erpers. Is like, we might be a little different, not process things the same way, but we're not forced to. It's not made a big deal of. Jeremy just says, you know, I know I'm a little bit different, and that's cool. You'll just let me be me, and it's without judgment, and without pressure to fix it. So, anybody else have anything to add on representation, Erp or not Erp?
Yes, I was actually thinking about something some days ago, that I actually see myself represented in Winona as well, but especially her like inability to like express her emotions and bottling it up and escaping her feelings and not tackling the problems head on. And I recognize myself a lot in that, and I was just thinking about it, and it's really, yeah, it's nice to yeah,
Be
I
able to
don't know,
relate.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, and even Winona and the whole thing with the curse, like, not that the curse is a disability, but like, you know, she inherited it from her family. She told everybody as a kid there's something wrong and was institutionalized for it. Then it turns out, no, actually, she was right. Now she's got to deal with it. She finds solutions that makes it work. But even after the curse is gone, she's still dealing with the aftermath of it. You know, like, it's still something she's going to carry with her whole life. And I feel like a lot of that, it's what kind of drew me to this show in the first place, is like dealing with family trauma and inherited trauma, and a lot of it's relatable as someone with chronic illness, even if that's not explicitly what it's meant to represent.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and especially because I feel like most of the characters have some degree of PTSD on Winona Earp. I mean, how could you not?
Yeah.
You're literally killing demons
Mhm.
and being surrounded by them. But that's another aspect of disability that doesn't really get talked about a lot, is the compounding trauma of dealing with ableism day in and day out. And
Mhm.
it's exhausting, and the PTSD that inevitably will come with that. It's complex, and it also deals, I hope that we are able to deal with Winona's like drinking problems and stuff like that, because that's not dealing with the root of the problem, you know, and that's where a lot of substance abuse problems come into play. And, you know, is people are just trying to cope in ways that aren't, you know, medically acceptable, I suppose,
Mhm.
because they don't have resources.
Mhm. Well, and even like Doc and like his whole, like the whole, when you kind of get down to it, like a huge part of why he doesn't want to die is because of something that happened to him when he was a kid. And he's kind of been running from that his whole life, to the point where he's, you know, made himself immortal because he doesn't want to face it. Also kind of falls in line with PTSD, and then, you know, kind of in the same way, like turning to things that are not necessarily the healthiest solutions as a way to cope. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that drew me to the show in the first place, is like how much Winona and Waverly talked about the traumas they went through as a child, and the fact also that it's still affecting them. Because a lot of shows, someone goes through something traumatic, they have an episode where they clearly have PTSD or they're super upset, and the next episode they're totally fine again, back to normal. So I really appreciate that, like, you know, Doc being as old as he is, he's still running from something that happened to him as a child. It's not like, oh, it's one and done, and then now we're, you know, back to business as usual. It's always a problem until you deal with it, which I think is a lot more true to real life.
I also get a sense that the characters do also talk about things behind, like off screen, And I think especially when after I know it's kind of not related, but with the Jolene episode and the Waverly and Nicole sorry scene, in my head, I feel like before and after that, they did have a conversation about, you know, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to make you better? Because their relationship's so strong. And I mean, their family unit on the show so strong. And I think that kind of reflects into the Earp fandom. Is like, I've seen it on Twitter. It's like, hey, are you okay? Like that's with the Earpa support. And I've seen so many people go, oh, I'm having a really bad anxiety day, or my PTSD is really setting me off, or even just in our group chat is I'm having a day, and because you'll understand, you know, everyone's there to help and go, hey, are you okay, and check in. And so it's kind of twofold. Like it's in the show, it's off camera in everybody's imaginations, and it's in real life in the fandom. It's wonderful. I think.
Yeah. So we spent a long time talking about how you can find excessive or find representation in Winona Earp. Any other shows anybody wants to bring up as like examples of more overt?
One that I wanted to mention was the film Run on Hulu, because they actually cast an ambulatory wheelchair user. Because, you know, seeing that is like, it's important, because we get made fun of, or we're called fakers if, you know, we are in a wheelchair most of the time, but we stand up and we walk. Like, I'm sorry that if I stand up, I'm likely to pass out. So I'd rather just stay seated.
Mhm.
So it's like, it's representation like that, where it's not made a huge deal out of, that a person can use a wheelchair and also is able to walk, is an important thing to see.
Mm.
There's an episode that like season 5 premiere of The Golden Girls talks about getting diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And as far as I'm aware, like, because obviously the way Golden Girls works, it is a kind of like one and done thing that you never hear about it again. But Susan Harris, who wrote the episode, has chronic fatigue. And it's probably one of the most accurate episodes of television I've ever seen of the actual process and what it's actually like and what doctors will actually say to you, which is not all good. And yeah, I feel like the speech that Dorothy gives at the end to the doctor when she runs into him in the restaurant is very much like everything that like Susan Harris would have liked to say to the doctor who probably did that to her. She just says it like way more politely than I would have. But yeah, like it kind of blew my mind when I watched it, because yeah, it's the line is something like, you know, she says something like, one day you're gonna get sick, and like I hope you have a better doctor than you were to me. Of like, I
Wow.
wouldn't even wish you on yourself, kind of thing. And it's just like the most polite way of like, you know, kind of saying up yours. But yeah, that one. And then I over the summer watched Orphan Black for the first time. And that one also had, I was surprised at how good the disability representation was, because I knew a little bit of it, but I didn't know the full extent. And the fact that there's multiple characters too that have disabilities, and like and that's never used against them, even though especially with the plot it 100% could have been multiple times. And it's kind of, there's the threat, and then the disability is kind of like the thing that they're going through on top of everything else they're dealing with. It's not weaponized.
One that I always bring up, or the one thing I always bring up when I'm talking about good rep, is Penelope on One Day at a Time. She obviously I relate to her on about 1,000 levels, being a female vet and a combat vet and that kind of stuff. But she has chronic pain and a shoulder injury, and she also has anxiety and depression. And seeing how they deal with that, like they don't, it's not made out, they don't, it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that, hey, you should deal with it. And she has a lot of support, and they normalize taking meds, and they normalize going to therapy, that kind of stuff. I really like to see. So that's probably one of my favorite ones lately.
Yeah. And I appreciate how they deal with addiction on that show too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Because
They
it
also
is
have a
like
wheelchair user.
yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
There's a lot
watched the
of good
film.
things about that show.
want that show back.
Yeah.
We
I
demand.
watched a film the other day called Moxie on Netflix, and there was a character in that, only a minor character, but she was really funny, and she's in a wheelchair. I don't remember her name, but I think it was something like Casey. And her first shot is she's trying to get into school, but all the cheerleaders are just stood around talking. She goes, "Oh yeah, that's great. Block the sidewalk. Don't worry about me. That's okay." And then so you kind of get this opinion of her, like, oh, she's just gonna complain the whole time. But she doesn't. Like every time as the film progresses, you see her just being funny or a bit quirky or just being herself, and then by the end of the film she's like completely involved. And so it's like there's a group of girls and they're all taking a selfie at the end, and they're all just sort of crowding around her, but she's at the front. And it's like, you don't so she was in a wheelchair, and I feel like the first time where I see a person in a wheelchair who's not just somebody in a wheelchair, if you know what I mean. And it's like she's an actual character, which is why I feel bad I can't remember her name. But she's really funny. And yeah, it was just another good representation of, okay, here's a character who we could have cast as being able-bodied, or maybe, they had an accident over the summer and needed a crutch. But no, it's okay, we're going to have this wheelchair character. And I know the film was based on a book, so I'm not sure if the character in the book is in a wheelchair, but again, it's just like, no big deal, here's a character. And so I like that media is now putting these characters into films and TV, because there'll be so many people watching that going, oh, maybe I can. It's so cliche, but they'll go, oh, I can do that too. I can be in a film and I'm in a wheelchair.
Yep.
Raising Dion is another show on Netflix that did that, where the friend is in a wheelchair, and it's even things like, because it's two kids, they go on play dates, like her dad and the main character's mom switch vehicles so that the mom can drive them places and have a van that can accommodate the wheelchair. And it's not even talked about, it's just shown. And yeah, and there is a scene where like the kid, being a kid, thinks like, oh, I could help you walk. And like, it's very like, it's shown from the kid's perspective as like, he doesn't get why that's a problem. But everyone around him is like, no, that's not the way to look at it. And kind of talks about like, no, like there's nothing wrong with her being in a wheelchair. And like the kind of like the handle of the aftermath, like, well, I thought was properly, but I'm going by memory. But yeah, that's another one that was well done.
We've all talked a good deal about representation in media now. The bottom line is it's starting to get better, but keep calling it out when you see bad representation. I mean, a lot of times the disabled community is kind of out on our own when there's bad representation. We don't need to dwell on it right now, but we in our chats, we've been talking about how there'll be pretty harmful representation, that it's harmful to people in the disabled community, but non-disabled folks will just throw accolades at a show because it, has queer rep or they like it, and they'll kind of ignore the pleas and the complaints from the disabled community, and it makes us feel alone and kind of not wanted. So I'm glad to see that it's getting better. So I lost my train of thought.
No, that sounds like a good summing up to me.
So next, what I want us to talk about is accessibility. So I know we have tons of cons in person, online. So that kind of accessibility and just making everything accessible in general for folks. What are some ways that y'all think people should make things accessible for the disabled community?
I think a great one that I've seen with a lot of online cons this year has been the interpreters. For a start, they make things great, for lack of a better word. But then also with that is captions and subtitles of videos and transcripts. I have a processing issue when it comes to words. So if I can read what the people are saying, then I'll get the jokes, or I'll just understand what they're talking about. And I know that a lot of podcasts do that now, which is great. And I love that the cons will, I mean, I've seen some of the earlier ones on YouTube, and some of the closed captioning is hilarious. And it does not match at all what they're saying, but they're getting better. And yeah, so for me personally, it's having captions. And even in your fan videos, maybe just have a transcript of what people are saying. I know that could help. And, also on a practical note, it will help because we have a lot of international ERPers, and that will help people whose English isn't their first language. So you're kind of doing everybody a favor by having subtitles. It
I want
just helps me.
to go off of that real quick too, because chances are, if you've seen, well, a lot of the panels and anything ERPR content up that has closed captions done by a human, I do those most of the time. The earlier ones, it's a difference between, I think what she was talking about was the auto-generated closed captions, which are useless almost. So what she's saying is basically like, go to the, if you're creating content, you should be going the extra step of making it accessible to everyone. I'm saying this as someone, like, I spend a lot of my time captioning panels, doing transcripts. So just, even if you don't need those, just, I mean, kindness is an ERPR thing. So know that other people do. So contribute to making sure things get captioned. Transcript, I also, like, I prefer to see things written down as well. And, it's not a hearing thing. It's just, it's easier to process that way. So I would just say, like, that if you're creating content that you're getting a lot of attention from, then it's kind of your responsibility to make sure that it's accessible. And just, if anybody listening that applies to, please come to me. Like, I work all the time on captions and on transcripts. It's a passionate hobby of mine. So if you have any questions about how to get things captioned, how to get things transcribed, I'm happy to help you out.
The other thing I'll add for that is, like, if you're doing a transcript, like, make sure you have it as live text as well, not just because people often put, like, especially on Instagram, will put like a picture of what was said, but then, like, screen readers can't use that. So it's good to just, like, even if you just copy and paste the same thing into the comments, then that can be actually, like, read by a screen reader as well.
Yeah, and Instagram and Twitter both have built-in alt text tools now. So you can either post it in the comments or in a reply, or you can actually embed it for screen readers on Instagram and Twitter. So.
And also another thing for hashtags, if you capitalize each individual word, that makes it a lot easier for screen readers to, read it properly instead of each individual letter, or it just sounds ridiculous.
Especially with Wynonna Earp.
Yeah.
The things that it comes up with are beautiful.
We want to talk about specific experiences at cons, like I know Taz, Heather, and I have been to quite a few cons in person. And so I think we can kind of attest to a lot of the ways that ERPers go out of their way for us that doesn't happen in, normal society to make sure that we're comfortable. We haven't had a few, I mean, everybody's going to have negative experiences, but for the most part, listening to us and taking into our account of, like, what we specifically need on an individual basis is really important, for organizers and volunteers to not just, like, have a one mindset of where certain people should sit or something like that, because we all have very, very varying and different needs, and a lot of the times they can overlap, and we need different seating situations for a different day or whatever. But just listening to us and our individual needs is something that ERPers are really good at, I feel like.
Yeah, and the first con I went to was a good example of that, because in their panel room, they had a designated seating area for accessibility, but it was up at the front and not to the side, which was it was put there specifically because they had ASL interpreters, so that you could see them, which was great if you need that, but not everybody, that's not why everybody has accessibility needs. And so we spoke to the con about that. And so what they ended up doing was they had us line up kind of separately, and there was maybe only like 10 or 15 of us. So it's not like we're taking up the whole space. And they let us in about 5 minutes early and just went, sit wherever you want. And we were literally spread out across the entire room based on what we needed. And I felt like that was like a really good representation of like just how different everybody's needs are, and that none of us sat in the same place based on our different health issues. But also that it was a really simple solution. Like they didn't have to do anything other than just let us in the room like 2 minutes before so we can sit where we need to, and then we're not going to bother anybody.
A lot of
We're not going
times
to be
people do the work for you.
yeah,
Just-
well, yeah, because it's also like, I had to plan for weeks to even just be there. So I
Yeah.
know exactly what I need to do to keep myself in the room. You just have to let me do it. And if you just give us that option of like, here, do what you need to do, that's really all you have to do, and I'll take care of myself. Obviously, there's going to be situations where people are going to need extra supports and help, and it's not a one size fits all, but it's not us then constantly having to individually come up to staff members afterwards and be like, hey, the seating at the front here isn't going to work for me. Can you put me somewhere else? And the room's already packed and there's nowhere to sit. Just like give us the opportunity to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves, and we'll kind of do the rest, because we don't really like having to, bug people or ask people for help a lot of the time either. Like, if I'm going to a con, I'm gonna have prepped to be there. So yeah, just like let us do what we need to do, and then we'll kind of not, we won't be in the way.
The more accessible a space is, the more we are able to be, independent and do what we need to do.
Mhm.
When I go into day-to-day life, kind of pre-COVID, but I would frequently wear my sunglasses in supermarkets and just general around the place because I'm very photosensitive, and I feel like just getting a sense of how bright the room's going to be in before you go into a space, a con, I always carry my sunglasses with me anyway, but it's nice to be prepared. Same with what you were saying, Taz. It's like you prepare it so much in advance, like you prepare everything. And as much as and so con organizers prepare stuff. And then if a disabled person goes, oh, I need to do this, then they can factor that into their planning. And obviously, I'm not going to say you need to turn the lights down, but the fact that the option of just, is the room okay, here's an exit, here's how wide the aisle is, are the lights okay, and it's just asking those little questions that can go a long way, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, the bottom line is pretty much no two people are going to have the exact same accessibility needs. So obviously people hear accessibility and they tend to only think, okay, wheelchair or deaf, hard of hearing. And those are the things they accommodate for. So we don't expect places to be prepared for everything, just to work with this. Like, this would make it easier for me. And as long as people are willing to try to level the playing ground that way, it's a huge deal, because that's the difference between me being able to go to cons and not being able to. If I didn't get accommodated with seats and with people helping me out with lines, I wouldn't be able to go to cons. I just simply couldn't do it. So it's not about any kind of special treatment or anything like that. I think we're talking about it's difference between equality and equity. Equality is going to do me no good, but equity is going to kind of make it a little bit easier, make my experience a little bit closer to somebody who is able-bodied's experience.
Yeah, it's the same reason that it's helpful having shorter lines in like autograph and photo rooms too, because for me, it's really comes down to like time equals energy for me. And I have a set amount of energy, and especially if I'm waiting to have a conversation or an interaction, the longer I'm waiting, the more of that energy I'm using. So I've had it where I've had to wait for a long time, and by the time I get to the autograph or the photo, I don't even remember having that experience. I have the proof it happened, but I can't remember it because I was drained at that point. Whereas if you have short lines, or let us go just get in and get out, then we're not dealing with that. It's also things like if you need an ASL interpreter, it's really hard to schedule if you don't know how long you're going to be in the lineup, because often there's only one or two and multiple people need them. You might need medication. It's also just like for me, like standing for a long period of time and even sitting for a long period of time can cause health issues. And if that starts to happen, I need to get out of there so I can go deal with that. So being able to get in and out is just a way that like I can do what I need to do and then go off and handle the results of that. As opposed to kind of being stuck in a situation that's only going to continue to make it worse. And I'd say like IRPers by far have been like amazing with that stuff, that if they ever see me not doing well, they will literally shove me in front of them or like move me up and be like, get up there. And I'm always like, I always feel bad. I'm always like, are you okay with this? Is this okay? And everyone's always like, no, your family, like get up there, do what you need to do, and go take care of yourself.
So do we want to go into talking a little bit about just a little bit about ableism? We don't have to dwell on it, but just a little bit about what it is. Some people have never even heard the term ableism. It's just any way of thinking that discriminates against disabled folks. Do we want to talk a little bit about, well, the example I always give of even well-meaning people participating in ableism, the very basic example is people trying to make the world, trying to fix climate change, that kind of stuff. And something that always kind of comes up is plastic straw bans. People always think we're going to save the world by banning plastic straws. What they don't take into account is there are tons of disabled folks for various reasons that need plastic straws. There's, for injury purposes, like Summer just raised her hand. I have a friend that has seizures. She needs to be able to drink out of a plastic straw. And it's just simple stuff like that where people think they're doing good, but if you're alienating and harming this whole subset of people, you're really not.
Yeah, it's trying to be a voice for the voiceless when you're actually silencing voices.
I hadn't heard of this straw ban before, so I'm finding this very educational.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the, trying to be more environmental friendly, which is a good goal to have. Like I said, you can't do it at the expense of
Other people's lives. Yeah.
So that's one example I always give.
Yeah, and everybody's like, what about the turtles? But it's like, what about all the disabled people who need this to stay alive? It's like, and you see one video of a sea turtle, like, yes, it's heartbreaking, but that's not the everyday reality for these animals. And the everyday reality is that a lot of disabled people need plastic straws to survive.
And it's also, why are you going after straws when there's so many big companies just dumping things in the ocean that has nothing to do with straws? Straws make up less than 1% of the pollution in the ocean. There's so many other things that would benefit from reducing, other than something that people rely on as a medical device.
And another thing too is just like, there's a lot of examples. I'm harping on that one because I don't want to sit here and like feel like I'm calling people out for things they do. But think about how that makes a disabled person feel when they're like, no, we don't care about you being able to live your life comfortably. We care about these turtles. Like,
yeah. Exactly. It's like, not everything is going to work for every person, because we can all be, none of us can be the perfect activist, and none of us can solve all of these issues on our own. It takes the collective. And I think that that's why, doing panels like this is so important, to make other people aware of like, there are bigger systemic issues at play here than just straws.
Gwen, I know you had something you want to talk about in terms of ableism in your healthcare experiences.
Yes, I wanted to address the ableism in especially the healthcare system, and how it's made very difficult for disabled people to get diagnosed or to get the right help, because there just aren't enough people with the knowledge to accommodate them. And I have recently again experienced that, because I'm trans and I'm looking to get surgery, but I need a referral letter, and I there's no person in the country, no psychologist that is specialized in gender and has affiliation with autism. So it's basically impossible for me to get one. And right now I'm kind of at this point that I really have to get creative and search for a loophole somewhere, because there just isn't someone available. And I think it's just sad actually that there are so little people that are aware of like autism and other disabilities. And um, especially since you're already trans, so it's already, you're a minority group, you're already um, in a very small pool to like find someone to treat you. But if you also are disabled, it's impossible. And I just wanted to um, address that, and yeah, so that people actually are aware of that, because I think it's important to know.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. So does everybody want to maybe go through and say kind of one thing that you would like to see from your non-disabled friends or non-disabled folks in the fandom in terms of how to be an ally to the disabled community?
I mean, personally, I would really love to see more people, like if they see something that makes them defensive for some reason, for any reason, that they come to us individually, um, to call out any potentially problematic stuff, or that it's probably a misunderstanding, quite honestly, because neurodivergent and neurotypical people, our brains literally work differently. We're going to have misunderstandings and miscommunications, but it's easier to deal with those things one-on-one for both parties than to, let's say, gang up on somebody and subtweet them, like, multiple times or multiple people. Just makes it a less safe space when, multiple people are doing something to one person, when there's a good chance that it was just a misunderstanding.
Yeah, I'd say like listen to us and share the conversations too. Like don't just ignore them. Like if you're not sure, you can always ask, like, is it okay to talk about this? But like it often, like, it means so much when I see, like, my non-disabled friends be like, hey, that thing that happened was like ableist or wasn't cool, because I feel like it gets to a point where it feels like that's all you're talking about if you're just the only one pointing it out. And then also because there's no one backing up or supporting it, it also feels like you're kind of talking into a void. So yeah, like listening and learning, and also not taking it personally, because it's often we're not trying to say this as an attack. It's like, hey, this thing hurt, here's why. Or even for me, like if I'm around people and I have a flare up, I will go very quiet, and like, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I assumed you didn't want to be around me, and that's not what it is. It's my body can't handle what it's dealing with, and that's why I'm quiet. And so just kind of like, yeah, just like listening and understanding, and trying to learn from us.
I'm pretty much just echoing what they said. I mean, the first step in being an ally to any marginalized community is to listen. We'll tell you, and like what Ted was saying, I love it when I see my non-disabled friends kind of boost me and be like, hey guys, this is something maybe I hadn't thought of, maybe you haven't either. Let's try to be better. And I kind of end on just saying the disabled community is one of the few, maybe the only marginalized group that you could become part of at any time.
Yep.
Just because you're able-bodied now doesn't mean that you will be later on in life. God forbid you get an accident, and now you're gonna have to find ways to move throughout the world like that. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for having some compassion toward disabled folks.
Taz used the phrase temporarily able-bodied, and I really love that because, you know, it's so succinct, like everybody is temporarily able-bodied until they're not.
Well, it's even that can include short-term illness. Like
Yeah.
you get a flu, you're knocked out for a week. You got to still navigate the world that way. And even just aging
Yep.
causes health issues.
I think we're wrapping it up now, but I thank you so much to you guys that came and watched. If I know we're all receptive to any questions, so if anybody wants to go to Twitter, we'll keep talking about it.
Yep.
Keep burping.
I don't know how.